So Cadman, one of the things that I've noticed through my military career is sometimes there are different rules for different organizations. And let me give you a story. When I was deployed to Afghanistan, I had a Special Forces NCOIC who had worked with one of the groups. And, on one side of the airfield in Jalalabad, there were the 173rd. And on the other side were the dog and cats and three-letter organizations, Special Forces guys. And once they found out that my NCOIC was a former SF guy, former SF paralegal, about every week on our back porch, we would find a case of beer, a bottle of vodka, a bottle of whiskey, and of course we'd have to call Top over and pour it out. But it was just one of those things that, hey, GO1 still applied, but not really. I guess they call that what, big boy rules?
They do. So things are very different in different communities within the military. Some people, of course, have higher thresholds of expectations, and with those higher expectations also becomes a little bit more latitude. One of the issues, especially as we're entering kind of a new era, leaving GWAT, getting into LISCO, those lines become a little bit more shaded, a little grayer. And one of the issues is recently the special operations community has come under a lot of scrutiny. There's been a lot of scandals, and it has kind of politically charged the whole community in a lot of ways.
Right. So, your background is in Special Forces, right?
Yeah, I was not a Special Forces soldier, but I did work in the special operations community for the last half of my career. And I worked with a lot of senior leaders in that community very closely. I ended my time with the 3-year stint at the Special Warfare Center and School, where we train all the Special Forces, civil affairs, and PSYOP soldiers. And in addition to advising the command there, I made a lot of good friends, and I also trained a lot of soldiers, from the commanders who were going out to the groups to the brand new soldiers who were just entering that community, on some of the legal differences.
Right. And we got other lawyers on the team who were the legal advisor to the Special Operations Aviation Command. Is what they are? And then, of course, we've got combined, I think we got 18 or 20 years of experience at Fort Bragg. And that includes working with the elite conventional forces, the 82nd, folks working with the 101st, 101st, and, me and the 173rd. While those are still conventional forces, they're often aligned with missions with Special Forces.
Right. And then higher expectations. They've got storied histories, as most of us know, dating back, 70, 80, 100 years. And I think that the commanders who take over those units in each successive generation, they work very hard to uphold the standards that gave those units those reputations.
Right. And so let's talk about that. A Special Forces troop or a high-end, conventional forces troop that often does missions with them, what's different about their legal action versus, somebody from a finance battalion?
Well, one of the biggest differences is, for any legal action in the military, for 90% of legal actions in the military, the decider is going to be the commander. And those commanders are very, very, very different. And so part of it's going to depend on the op tempo of the unit in that particular moment, what may be going on external of that unit, but in the larger community, say some political scrutiny on SOF or the 82nd in particular. Those things all influence that. And so I think what's important is that when you have an advocate, it's somebody who's not just a defense attorney, who doesn't just understand the military law, but has been in the room with those types of commanders over and over again under a variety of different circumstances, whether that's pre-deployment, rear D, post-deployment, right before JRTC, right before NTC rotation, right before a big, I have to be careful here not to reveal too much, but a big training operation in another country, right? Those commanders have different priorities in those moments, and we've seen the way that they think and they handle these situations differently depending on the circumstances.
Right. I remember defending a couple of Special Forces Group soldiers who got in trouble on a joint multinational, multi-country training exercise that made it real difficult for me to defend them, right? Because there were some things that were public and there were a lot of things that weren't public or classified. And so understanding the nuances of how the mission is going to affect your ability to defend is also really important.
Absolutely. And then what I found, particularly in the special operations community, a lot of those commanders, rather than being quite so obsessed over misconduct itself, they are very, very attuned to the effect that certain types of misconduct can have on partner relationships, because that's what it's all about in the SOF community, is building that partner capacity and working with foreign partners. And if the conduct of a soldier affects those relationships, commanders will often come down hard. So it's important to have an advocate who understands those dynamics, those priorities in the commander's mind, and can help to argue that this should be viewed as the misconduct alone, if it should be viewed that way at all, but ultimately there are alternative causes that maybe affected the actual relationship.
Right. And of course, then there's the evidence, right? Some of the evidence that these commanders might rely on would be classified or at least not public, and they're not going to want to share that with us, right? Even if we have the right clearance level, there's still going to be close hold on that. So getting that information oftentimes is very difficult.
That's right. And just knowing people in the community, knowing how the community works and thinks, knowing who to advise the client to talk to, those things are vital in actually accessing the proper information to mount a real defense.
Right. You know, when I was an undergraduate, I studied communication and public address, right? That's what I got my degree in. And I remember in either one of my first or second speech classes, the thing that they taught us was, even if your message is basically the same, it will be delivered differently depending on your audience, right? And so you have to do an audience analysis before you can formulate the best persuasive speech. Now, applying that to the military, you know, your audience are your commanders, your decision makers, right? And if you don't know diddly about the special forces community, you're not going to do a very good job formulating an argument that resonates with those guys.
That's exactly right. I can pull a recent example. I won't go into too much detail, but I recently advised a client, and one of the first things I asked, he was in the special operations community, what's your commander like? What's his operational background? Is he tabbed? What group did he come from? What deployments has he been on? All of those things informs the way that he makes decisions and what his priorities are, because we've seen it play out in real time.
And not just in special forces themselves, but each group has its own dynamic.
That's right.
And you really have to get to know that. If you're a special forces soldier or with one of those units with a high op tempo, we're the lawyers for you. We're the law office of Will M. Helixon, your warrior advocates. You defend the nation, we defend you.